Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Unboxed. I'm your host AJ, the podcast where we unravel the heart and soul of branding, marketing, technology, and more. Today I have with me Giovanni Everduin, also known as Gio. He's a Harvard Business School alum with 23 years of experience in strategy, innovation, and leadership. Passionate about leveraging Web3 technologies to transform the banking industry. Gio is a mentor, board director, and founder of a creative agency dedicated to driving positive change and innovation. Welcome to the show, Gio.
Thank you. It makes me sound really impressive when you read it that way.
Yeah, we wanted to impress you for me.
He recorded for my mom and I can send it to her. Yeah.
Sure. So, you are at the intersection of a lot of things. You're in the banking industry, you are a Web3 expert, you have a creative side to yourself. I just want to understand your career journey from the start, where you started and how you ended up here in Dubai working with CBD.
I mean, it's a bit of a weird career, to be honest. Every time I look back, I think I never really fit a box. And so at some point when I was a little bit more further in my career, when I could afford to, I kind of created my own box. But I think, so I started in the US, and after that I went to Mexico City for a little bit. I was working in political consulting.
Right.
I was actually working on the presidential campaign of Manuel Lopez Obrador.
Okay.
Manlo, or El Peje, as we called him in Mexico.
Yes.
That was a failed campaign, but it was a very interesting one, and I was doing opposition research. I don't even know how I got there. It just kind of is one of the things that just happened, and then from there, I spent a little bit of time in New York. From New York, I went into Prague working in outsourcing, which at that time, back in probably talking about 2006, 7 now.
Austria.
Yeah, it was really, really big.
Yeah.
And so I ended up working on this massive global outsourcing deal for Unilever, which was the biggest one at the time. My uncle was a partner in consulting, and he kind of told me like outsourcing is going to be the big new thing, try to get into it. Spent a lot of time in Prague running some of their delivery centers, which is basically, the back office for some of these functions, which was super interesting. And I ended up in consulting because, I was interacting with a lot of the consultants. And so you'll find this as a theme that I roll into things. Like I have never really planned what I wanted to do, but I also knew very clearly what I like. And so I ended up in consulting, lived in London, spent probably out of the 7 years that I worked from London, maybe 3 years in London, lived in Barcelona for 2 years with Unilever, Brussels, Romania, so many different countries. Ended up as a consultant in banking, because in 2008 the whole global banking crisis happened.
Yes.
Every consultant everywhere in the world was kind of like realigned to banking. Did a project back in 2010 in Kuwait, working with one of the big government entities. And following that, I don't actually know how, but I think my CV found its way to someone in Dubai. And that was a gentleman called Sahil bin Taraf. He's the current chief operating officer for FAB. At the time, he was the chief HR officer for Emirates NBD, but also he was tasked with setting up this new entity called Tanfeed, which was meant to be like an onshore outsourcing transformation type business. So I was probably within the first 10 employees that he hired to help him build that, and we built that, scaled it to about 3,000 people, which was great. Probably one of the most fun experiences I've ever had. But then at some point it became business as usual, and I think a lot of the core team that founded it left, including Sahil, including myself. I kind of said I'm never going to work for a bank again. Famous last words. I ended up in CBI through a mutual acquaintance. Worked with the CEO and the board at the time. Ended up working with the young Emirati who became the new CEO. Currently is the CEO, Ali. And I think we just developed a really good rapport together. And so, I just kind of stayed around to work with him because I really enjoyed working with him. He had a great vision for what he wanted the bank to do, which is leading into what I'm doing now, right? A lot of non-conventional things. And so, I have gone within that. I have gone from being an outsourcing, political consultant to outsourcing to a management consultant, strategy consultant. I used to run marketing and communications, and I became chief people officer. Chief people officer, I became a board advisor. Board advisor, I'm now a chief, what's my formal title? Chief strategy and innovation officer. And I had our venture arm, which is something new. Because I always like startups and investing in startups and advising them. And so, I was very fortunate I was able to kind of bring that together. That's a very long background.
That's really colorful, actually. So
makes no sense.
lot of areas, lot of But one thing that I've found consistently, what you said is that you've always been following your passion, and you've always been trying to do something that really excites you, gets you going, right? You've never tried to stick to something, and probably you're a person who gets bored quickly if you stay in some place for too long. And I think that shows your creative, mindset. Let's.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. No comment.
All right. So you're in the Web3 space right now, and there's a lot of. 2022 was a big year for Web3. There's a lot of things happening around. NFTs was booming, crypto. Facebook was rebranding to Meta. And a lot of there's a lot of news around Web3, and in your view, what is Web3? And for people who don't really know Web3, how is it different from Web 1 and Web 2?
It's funny, right? This question implies that most people know the difference between Web 1 and Web 2, which I also think people don't know. I think Web 3 is just a very convenient term to describe a new set of technologies that kind of all come in together, and is fundamentally based on blockchain technology. If you want to look at it very simple, I think a definition that I've heard that I'd like is that Web 1 was really read, right? Web 1 was the first interaction of the internet, and you can go online and you can consume information. You couldn't contribute. And so that became Web 2, which is read and write, which is really means, like, if you think about it in the context of the mobile phone, which I think was a big driver in this, it was the idea that you could now interact, right? You could upload, whether it's text or video at some point, photos. So now you can read and you can also write, and it became very dynamic and interactive. Web 3 is really the logical evolution of that, because the one thing you didn't have in Web 2 is ownership, right? If you think about it, you mentioned Facebook/Meta, Facebook, Google, any of these companies owned all the content. And because of that, they own the data, they own the content, which means they made most of the money off it. Some of them came a little bit bad, but the majority of them didn't. And so I think what you have now is, as a creator or as a person, you can actually own your content. I would say that's probably the most, there's more, but that's the most defining factor of Web3. And the example is this: if you leave Facebook today, right, you have followers, you have content, meaning photos, posts, everything else, right? Your social graph is what you can call it. If you were to leave tomorrow, you can't take that with you. Facebook owns that. In Web3, if you leave, you can take all of it with you to any different platform, because the followers are yours, the likes are yours, the posts are yours. You just give access to a platform to temporarily use it and showcase it. And I think that's really for many people, from a hippie perspective, really the appealing factor of Web3, which is you now have full ownership over your content.
Yeah. And what about the immersive experiences? Because there's a lot of talk around metaverse in 2022, but 2023 was, there was a big shift, because OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, and everything, all the conversation started, pointing towards AI and how AI is going to take over, and what are the recent developments. And I think in 2024, it's continuing that trend. Do you, in your view, is AI part of Web3 experience?
I would probably frame it differently. I think AI, Web3, immersive technologies, VR, AR, holographics, I think they're all part of innovation one way or the other. So at any given time, something is more popular and hotter than the others. I mean, AI has been around for 50 years, probably longer, since the 50s, right? And so I think right now, ChatGPT is kind of giving it a completely different boost that makes it far more accessible to people. But we've been using AI systems for many things for a very long time, maybe under the hood, but still, I think the metaverse probably came out way too hot. Like, the technology is still very interesting. People are now forced, because of the lack of, let's call it, spotlight, to develop real use cases. And there are real use cases. I am particularly bullish, but also biased, and I'll tell you why, but I'm particularly bullish on holographics, 3D geospatial holographics. I'm biased because I sit on the board of a company that does this, that do some of the most amazing holographic capabilities. But if I see what they're developing, and if I see how we're going to be able to consume full 3D capabilities, and then you combine that with something like AI, right, where you can have, I hate chatbots. We need to talk about it at some other point, but I don't like chatbots in general. But the idea of a virtual character, right, which you can now do with AI, and then being able to project that visually holographically, I think is a very interesting one.
Oh, that's really interesting, yeah.
Right, and so where blockchain or Web3 comes in is on many different levels. Number one is right now all of the data is owned again, right, for AI by a couple of companies globally, right? So there are people who would say you need to decentralize that. So nobody can ever shut down a model because they control the servers that the model operates from. There's also people who say that you should never do that because that could effectively lead in the apocalypse when AI comes. I'm not here to give a very strong opinion either way, but I think that's usually when you look at Web3 and AI, it's around how the data and the services are actually being consumed and where they're being stored. There's a couple of other things that I think are really interesting about blockchain. With AI right now, everything is questionable, right? Like, you could listen to a voice conversation where I synthesize your voice and I use AI to have you replicate a certain script, and it would be very hard. So this notion of who owns your voice, right? So OpenAI had this little spat with Scarlett Johansson. She wanted to use her voice. She didn't want it. And then they synthesized a voice that's very similar to hers.
Anyway, let's
right. So who owns the voice? Who owns the way you speak, your inflection, your pattern, your intonation, your likeliness, I guess, right? Like, who owns that?
Yeah.
But also something very simple, like if you see a video of Donald Trump saying something incredibly outlandish, there's a 50-50 chance that's actually true, and there's a 50-50 chance it's not. And so what you could do with something like blockchain is you could actually stamp certain things from a validity perspective to effectively rate and ensure authenticity.
Yes.
So, because how do you know content is real versus fake, right? And so I think what I like about blockchain is immutable, it's permissionless, right? And it's obviously a public ledger, so it's a great way, even for brands like Rolex or Hermes, who are increasingly looking towards that. You buy a bag, can you have it linked with a chip to an entrance on the blockchain, so when someone else buys that bag, you can effectively transfer the token of authenticity, which is then linked to the hardware, right, or the physical object. And I think that's probably where the two intersect.
Great. A lot of interesting things that you've mentioned over there. I want to get into a lot of things, but when we talk about, I mean, there's a lot of conversation around doctoring, the appearance and stuff like that. Nobody ever thought about the video part of it, the voice part of it, right? But when this thing came up of Scarlett Johansson, her voice being, taken. I mean, she claims that she was approached by OpenAI and she refused, and then OpenAI created their own version of what it should sound like. It opens up. I mean, I never imagined, because there was these discussion around the look and feel, something being doctored, videos being created by AI, but just the voice. It's interesting, right? So it's quite.
I genuinely believe that identity management, right? And the privacy around that will be one of the big ethical debates for the foreseeable future.
Exactly.
And it's scary, to your point, because 5 years ago we would have never thought we need to have these conversations, right?
Absolutely.
About proving that you are actually who you say you are.
Absolutely.
But it also opens up a host of new opportunities, and I think that's the exciting thing with technology. As much as it has its risks, it also has a significant amount of opportunities.
Today is a very interesting day, because I had some guests come over and we talked about, one was a cloud computing expert, and the other one was a legal expert on Web3. So
a legal expert on Web3.
Yeah, a legal expert on Web3. So it's quite interesting to understand how data is being captured, it's being used, and the importance of the legal aspects surrounding how to protect this data, and so on. And one of the conversations that I had with one of the experts was like, Apple recently had their WWDC developer conference keynote a couple of 2 days back, I believe, on Monday, and Apple was all about privacy, on-device computing, and they say we don't store anything on the cloud and blah, blah, blah. But they've reached a point where they have to give in. They launched Apple Intelligence, AI, and they talked about private cloud computing. So some things that are not, that the device is not able to do on device, things that will be sent to, they call it private cloud, with security and protocols in place and stuff like that. So there's a lot of data being shared, the information that we pass on to ChatGPT, although it's quite exciting to see a lot of things, we're generating images, but all this, we're teaching the algorithm on how to use it. Where do you see this? How important, being in the banking sector, how important is privacy and data for you? I'm sure you have a lot to talk about it.
I think well, first and foremost, as a person, it's incredibly important. And I think
your personal data,
yeah. So one thing I really think is great what ChatGPT did from a business model perspective, right? Not necessarily great for people like us, is that they effectively are crowdsourcing the training for the model, right? Because they're giving you some value, and then you in turn effectively train that data perpetually.
And we pay for the subscription as well.
Right, which is, if you think about it, that's amazing. Like whoever came up with that should get a medal from that perspective. Now, as a person, but let's say as a bank particularly, I think there's a lot of regulations around data, right? And not to get into the regulations too much, but I think we're very much restricted around how and how we can use data, where we can store data, what data can be stored in country versus out of country. And so that has become probably that has definitely become a top 5 consideration, right? When you look at it from a risk management perspective, is data and data privacy. At the same time, I find it interesting if I contrast that. So that's what we're doing, and we're being regulated, and it's the right thing to do to protect people. But if you look at what people are volunteering on a daily basis, it's almost the opposite. My sense is genuinely whenever people feel there's some level of use case or benefit or comfort that you can get, and I'm exactly the same, by the way. I rely completely on Google to tell me when I need to go to the airport or meetings coming up or anything else, right? Subscriptions, and I accept the fact that they actually probably have access to way more information about me as a person and what I do, and probably the people around me, than I maybe should be comfortable with. But at the same time, I look at the immediate advantages and I'm like, that's okay. And I think that's what most people have, right? So as a bank, super important. And it will become increasingly more difficult, especially as some of these new technologies come up. And that's why you see things like private blockchains. And blockchain in essence is meant to be decentralized, but now you have centralized blockchains. And why do you have that? Because people see the value of blockchain technology, but they still need to have some level of control and governance over that, right? And whether you're a nation state or a bank or a regulator, it kind of makes sense. So ultimately, I think a lot of these technologies, you have a movement that is incredibly extreme to almost like the utopian hippie side, as I like to call it. And I'm probably a little bit there myself, if I'm honest. Like fully decentralized, finance, DeFi, and everything else. But at the same time, real mass adoption will probably be a little bit more in the middle.
Great. You're in the banking sector. Not touching upon the fintech startups or there's a lot of fintech startups around. Some of them have gone to become big unicorns, Stripe, Square, and a lot of other ones as well. Banking, when you think about it, it's more traditional, it's very complicated. You think about this mammoth, it was something that comes to you as this big building. And how do you integrate Web3, something that is relatively new, and into something a lot traditional like that? And how easy is it? Because there's a lot of data, a lot of concern. I mean, I know you cannot disclose everything, but what are the protocols in place that you need to think about when you merge these two elements, you being in that space? And especially if a traditional bank decides to adopt these kind of technologies, it just shows the forward thinking approach of the bank that they are thinking about it right now. So in your view, what kind of what are the key considerations or protocols that a traditional bank need to when they're entering into the Web3 space? What are the risks? What are the controls that they need to put in place? Maybe not too technical, but in a layman's term.
I can't get too technical anyway. I say at 40,000 feet all the time, but I think let's unpack that question, because there's a lot of questions involved. I think first and foremost, banking is actually very simple. Right? You give me money to hold as a deposit. I give you an interest on that. The interest I give you is slightly less than the interest I charge when I give that money that you gave me to lend it out to someone else. And fundamentally, this is what banking is, right? And then there's a lot of things in the middle and everything else. But at the core of it, I think banking has fundamentally stayed the same, and you can debate when banking formally started. But I think fundamentally it's been the same, right? It's a place where you can store your value and a place where you can leverage your value through loans and everything else for those people who don't have it. Now, banks, I think when you look at Web3, but actually I would argue if you look at anything else, any new technology, the problem is usually the same, which is legacy systems, legacy thinking. Legacy systems, you have IT systems that are not necessarily optimized for, connecting to new things.
New technology,
I think a lot of banks struggle with APIs, right? Which are the basic connectors. And it's because you never really had to, right? It's important to understand that. It doesn't come from a place of like, we didn't future-proof. It's more that there was really no future to prove for at the time that most banks invested in these systems.
Exactly.
Second thing is legacy thinking or mindset, which for me is usually far more difficult. And that's, people have done things in a certain way for a certain time, a long time.
Yes.
Right? Changing that mindset is very, very hard, especially if people don't necessarily either see an immediate return on investment, which with some new technologies you don't, right? You're kind of investing in the future, not necessarily in today. I think the second thing is a lack of actual experience in that, whatever that may be. And let's take Web3 as an example. I usually tell people, if you're thinking about integrating Web3 into banking, but you've never even owned a non-custodial wallet, or you know what, I'll go a step back. You never even owned a custodial wallet, meaning a wallet on any exchange, you know, whatever it's Kraken or Binance or Crypto.com or Rain. I need to name all of them so I don't feel biased that I'm pushing them. But if you haven't done that, if you've never bought crypto, if you've never swapped crypto, if you've never on-ramped, meaning, you know, take fiat currency and kind of exchange that into crypto. If you've not bought an NFT, if you're not part of an NFT or any other community, if you've never been part of a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, and by the way, I'm not saying people should, but if you want to talk knowledgeably about it, if you want to understand the way these communities operate, you better be part of that, right? You better understand it, you better experience it. Now, that is my big way of saying, if you haven't done those things, that's a significant risk, because if you don't understand the technology, if you don't understand the culture, if you don't understand the use cases that new technologies are kind of solving for, then how on earth are you ever going to be able to take them back and implement them? So first advice, get your hands dirty. Go in and figure something out. Play around with the technology, see what works, see what doesn't work, and then you should be able to understand, based on what you already know from traditional finance, where the opportunities are. Where's the friction, right? What problems are they solving that you could actually implement within a banking system that would make it better? And what problems are they solving that don't exist in banking today but could be there tomorrow? And what are some of the things that don't fundamentally work well in Web3? Because trust me, there's many things that don't work well. A big problem is, in my opinion, security and safety. I usually tell people Web3, to some extent, if you go fully non-custodial, it's kind of like using your ATM pass in like an ATM, and every second or third time you do that, there's a 70% risk that you lose all your money, right? Like if that was an actual system, no one in their right mind would use it.
Exactly.
I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you know, to an extent, there are significant risks in Web3 when it comes to safety and security. So your question was, how do you go about it as a bank? I think two things. A, you have no choice, you have to. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon enough you will. Whoever's early will benefit, right? I think Web3 is redefining to some extent the way business is being done, and I think it gives a great opportunity for early adopters. The second thing is understand what the technology is and how you can use it, figure out use cases, and then do experiments. Start small. Don't try to boil the water, because that doesn't boil the ocean, I should say. That never really works. Find small use cases within your risk appetite and then scale up. And as you get more comfortable, do bigger things. And the third thing is either hire people who know what they're doing or employ consultants. And oh God, I hate it, because consultants are usually very tricky, right? Because you end up with consultants that have equally zero experience. But when I say consultants, end up with people who can advise you, who are very well versed in both the technology and the culture. And then ask them to help you understand where you can add value.
True. I mean, putting whatever you said, there's a lot to unpack, but putting whatever you said in a personal context, you know, you just feel the water, put your legs in the water, feel it. Personally, I'm not an expert in NFT or crypto, but I've tried to play around with it. Although the technology, the blockchain technology is pretty robust, and there's a lot of security, and it's pretty controlled. But when you get, as a newbie, when you come into the picture, you know, you buy an NFT, there's a lot of scammers out there sending you wallet address and giving you deal, you know. So I think that's the window that you really have to be careful about, right?
I think the way I would look at it now, right? Like in Web3, I'm pretty active in the Web3 community. In the Web3 community, we always say, oh, mass adoption. But you know what? For mass adoption to happen, you have to also forgo of this like buy devs for dev mindset. And what I mean by that is a lot of protocols are designed by engineers. And I think they're designed to some extent for engineers, not necessarily intentionally, but just because of the fact that it was right? And so, as you said, as a newbie, or as we call them, normies, it can actually be very daunting to go. In fact, I would never, ever want my parents to go on Web3 without direct supervision of myself. I still, and I think I kind of know what I'm doing, but I still times where I'm like, oh, should I click this? Right? Did I compromise my OPSEC, my operational security? I have way too many wallets. Each of these wallets has seed phrases. I'm very particular about that. Do you want cold storage? But then also, do you actually want to write down your seed phrases, store them in multiple security locations, not on paper because it might get burned. So, all these things, if you think about it, there's no way that I can go into a bank, mine or the bank I work at, or any other bank, and tell people, hey, I have this cool new thing called Web3, and you're going to have to memorize all these seed phrases. And if something ever happens, well, good luck. We can't really help you, right? So naturally, that's not the way. And the way naturally for me would be banks, or, I think banking will change. The role of a bank will change. But I think the fundamental core role that the bank will always have, until maybe something else comes out, is this idea of a trusted, credible, licensed/regulated entity that is an intermediary, right? And so that can kind of help people, give them the safeguard for storing value. So I think people would like to have Web3 maybe speed, Web3 efficiency, but they would still like to know that if something goes wrong, they have an institution in the middle that they trust, regulated, that they can go to for any problems.
I think that's the most important part. I remember, the first time I tried to buy crypto, tried to encash it, it was easy to buy it, but getting
it out,
it out was a I had to spend days to figure it out, and the third-party agents and all that.
It's one of the hardest things to do, and you don't figure that out until you get to the point where you want to take it out, right? Because nobody tells you.
Exactly.
I think it's also interesting because there's a reason why off-ramping, that's what's called off-ramping, right? Crypto back into fiat, why it's so hard. There's this stigma around money laundering and fraud and everything else, but then if you look at the data, so there's a company called Chainalysis, probably one of the leading forensic analysts when it comes to blockchain, or actually crypto, blockchain, whatever that may be. And so I think it's less than 1% of all of the world's fraud and money laundering is actually done through crypto. And if you really think about it, and it's not to say that parts of crypto don't enable it, but if you really think about it, if you want to commit fraud, you'd be pretty stupid to do it on a permissionless, trustless public ledger, right? You want to do that somewhere where it's a lot easier to move things around without. And so I usually tell people, like, probably fiat is a way smarter way to commit fraud. Not that you should don't commit fraud, but if you were to do it, hypothetically, I think you'd be better off doing it in fiat. It would be in blockchain. But it's just this concept that people just see, and they look at things like FTX and Mt. Gox and all these things that have happened. We can talk for hours about all the banks that have failed, right? And so it's just a matter of perspective.
All right, let's move on to the next topic. So you've been involved with startups, and you mentor them, and being in Dubai, Dubai is very vibrant, embracing a lot of technology. We are sitting in front of the Museum of the Future. There was a news 2 days back that the Crown Prince has authorized 20 plus chief AI officers for government departments. So we're at the right place at the right time, I believe. Two things. How do you see Dubai evolving? How do you see Dubai embracing this technology and moving forward? And being in the startup ecosystem yourself and being a mentor to startups, how many of these startups do you think, what percentage of startups that you worked with or mentored are in this new digital space?
Well, let me start with the second question. I think almost, and when you say the new digital space, you mean AI,
the Web3, blockchain.
I'd say almost everyone these days, simply because it's not so much because of Web3, I would say, but I think everyone now adds AI to whatever they're doing, right? But also, to be fair, right? Well,
it's a buzzword,
it is a buzzword, and it helps. It helps with raising money because the valuation multiples for an AI company are significantly higher than for an
Good example is Apple. They overtook Microsoft because they announced Apple Intelligence 2 days back. They were number 2 in valuation. They overtook Microsoft just because of the announcement.
Well, that's the thing. So I understand that. At the same time, I genuinely believe there's a lot of businesses that actually, where AI can actually be beneficial, right? Because AI is able to do things either much faster or more efficient, or unlock completely new capabilities. And so it makes sense for a lot of companies to kind of be in the AI space one way or the other. And so I'd say out of all of the companies, let me just think. I'm trying to think if there's one that I can think of that is not either in AI, Web3, or mixed reality.
So, Gio, I was in Morocco 2 weeks back, attending GTEx Africa. And I've also been to STEP conference, which happens in Dubai, where you see a lot of startups. And one thing that I've consistently noticed is that you have a lot of startups out there, presenting a lot of things, but most of them, 90% of them, I don't see anything unique. It's either, they're bringing an idea from the West, localizing it, and trying to pitch it, get some funding. Do you think that that's going to work?
I mean, I think it's already working. I think true innovation, original innovation, is really, really hard. I feel like as humanity, we've probably exhausted most, not all, definitely not all, right?
Yeah.
But most things. And so for me, innovation often comes down to, more what I would call more regional, local innovation comes down to you take something from one market, one geography, one specific context, whatever that may be, and you apply it in another, right? Where that wasn't common before. And I think that is innovative. There are many, many fintechs that are effectively doing exactly the same thing, right? And ultimately, if you break it down, it's either payments, it's lending, or it's something around managing your money, store of value, and so, or cards, which is another wonderful thing that a lot of companies are getting into, right? Doing cards, whether it's prepaid cards or credit cards.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think there's something wrong with it. I just don't necessarily think that that's always going to be a very sustainable path for most startups. And when you look at it, a lot of them end up losing out because there usually is only enough space for, 1, 2, maybe 5 players in any given market. And when I say any given market, when it's 5, it's probably the UAE. But if you're the US, there's maybe space for 50, right? I don't know, depending on the size of the market. I don't think there's something wrong with that per se. I think as long as you are able to deliver and build a product that people need, there's still a value in that, whether you came up with it or if you just adapted, let's say, you made a local Google or the local Uber, right? There's many of those, or the local, it's another good example, Amazon, right? I don't necessarily think there's something wrong with that. What I would like to see when people do that is just apply a specific local filter that really adds something that solves particular local, a value that solves particular local problems. Because if not, you may as well just have Amazon open there. And I think if you look at 2 companies here that effectively took an idea from the West, but it could be coming from anywhere, by the way, but that took an idea from the US in this case. Karim, right, and looking at Uber, and Souk looking at Amazon. I think what made them really successful and ultimately led to them being bought is that they took a idea, but then they localized it heavily to the point where it would actually be difficult for either Amazon and or Uber to compete with them in this market because they had a much deeper understanding of local nuances. I think that's a value you can bring. At the same time, if you can build a company,
I think you find these examples in every country. Like for example, if you go to Indonesia, Singapore, Gojek, Grab, So I mean, every country has its own version of Uber, and they've localized it, and it's working for them. So the only way for these companies to come in is either to acquire them or
Which is, I mean, I know founders that have that strategy, right? They build a company effectively with the long-term view of getting acquired by whoever the let's call it the global dominant player is. There was a time where there were so many eBay companies popping up everywhere, and Rocket Internet made a whole business model of that, right? Which is look at what works globally and then build it locally. So I don't think there's a problem with that. As an investor at a personal level, I'd love to see more really innovative companies, but at the same time, that's hard. That's really, really hard. I think where I see a lot of real innovation is in this carbon credit space, but particularly I would say not in the carbon credits, in the food tech space. Agricultural renewal, companies that are solving real, existential problems for the planet and for humanity, right? Food supply, quality and quality of water. And what I see there is something really, really fascinating. And it's fascinating because they're taking a problem that I didn't even consider really exist. And some of these problems exist today. Some of them will exist tomorrow, and they're dedicating their time and effort on solving those. And I find that both very admirable, but also I find it incredibly innovative.
Yeah. I think even in JEDEX, Africa, there was this pitch deck where startups were pitching their ideas, and I think there was a lot of these kind of solving agricultural water issues, real existential problems. So I think it's really nice to see some innovation on those lines, medical, education related. So yeah, it's really nice. Gio, before I let you go, one last question. Like, you are the head of innovation. You're a mentor to startups. You have your own personal life. How do you balance everything? How do you keep up with advancement in technology? Because I'm sure you're a super busy person.
I mean, once I figure it out, I'll come back to this podcast.
Okay, we'll get you on the next episode.
I mean, honestly, I'll tell you, it's really, really hard because things are moving, particularly in Web3 and AI, by the way, things are moving so incredibly fast. And so, well, first of all, I think one thing I did really well is I invested in having a really smart circle of people around me.
Okay.
Right? And they kind of act as a filter, and they give me kind of like pre-filtered, summarized nuggets of information, which is incredibly powerful, because unfortunately I wish I could, but going through white papers and reading academic papers on AI, I can't do that. Right? I just can't. The way I do it is, how people always brag about, I wake up at 2 and I do, and I mean, this is not a flex at all. I wish it wasn't the case, but I do wake up around 4:30, spend an hour on Twitter Spaces, Discord servers, maybe go a little bit through GitHub. What else do I usually check?
These are your sources.
These are my sources. Telegram, I have a bunch of Telegram groups, and that's where I kind of like, there's groups that kind of give me almost my reading material for the day.
Okay.
And then something I deep dive on it. The reason I'm doing it is not because, I enjoy getting up that early, though I am usually up very early. It's because I also have twins, and they wake up at a certain time, so I need to be ready by that time. Because then me and my wife will start the morning routine. My wife has an incredibly busy and important job. I'd argue say more important than mine. And so it's not easy. So here's the thing. You can't have it all at the same time. People always say that. Really, honestly, it's not. It is a trade-off. And here's the thing I'll say. This is becoming a little bit more, Instagram mental health advice. But I'll say this. If you're not conscious about what you're trading off, that trade-off will be made for you. Right? And that's really important, because it will always be the one thing you don't want. And unfortunately, that tends to usually be family. Right? And so that was an important lesson, is that you do really need to make sure that you prioritize. 100%. And you never think that you have to prioritize something like family, but I think that you do. And even if you are not doing some of the things I'm doing, I know that these days people are so busy. There's so many triggers and so many, stimuli in life, right? It's very easy to lose track of important things. I was talking to a good friend of mine a couple of days ago, and we're like, people don't read books anymore. People don't read books. Like, it's going to a park with a book and just losing yourself and just let that absorb. And it's really, really hard, but it's also really, really beautiful, right? It's a very intimate relationship that I think you can have with a book. And then I got really inspired. I'm like, I need to go read a book, because I have like 8-9 books next to the bed that I need to read. But you know what? Then lives take over, and 8-9 books become 10-12 books. And so I guess the point I'm making is, your question was, how do you manage it all? I don't. I try to do it to the best I can. I'm dropping balls left, right, and center. I just hope I don't drop anything really important. But at the same time, I'll tell you this. The stuff that I'm reading on the future and everything else, my family comes first. The stuff that I'm reading on the future, everything else definitely comes second, simply because it is super exciting, right? The future is moving really, really fast. And I genuinely believe that the best way to predict the future is to help shape it in whatever shape or form you can. And so for me, being there and speaking to people that are, some of these people that I talk to on a daily basis, I don't even know their actual names. Some of them I don't even know their, what their gender is. I'm pretty sure that some of them are probably like, 18, 19 years old, but they're building the future of Bitcoin, or they're building the future of AI. And it's just really fascinating that you now have that level of access to people. Last thing I'll say, you asked me at the very beginning, right? What are some of the things to consider, or the risks for banks or traditional companies to embrace new technologies, like let's say Web3? And I talked a little bit about this idea of the legacy mindset. I genuinely do believe that as the access to information and content, but information has become easier and more widespread, our natural intellectual curiosity has almost gone inverse. And what I mean by that is it's easier than ever today to access information about any topic, right? You can use ChatGPT, you can go on Google, you can go on YouTube, you can go anywhere, right? Read a book, watch a movie, watch a series, talk to someone. Talk to someone on the other side of the world, right? Through Google Meets or Zoom or Teams or whatever your weapon of choice is. But at the same time, I kind of get this sense that with all of that, people have become less and less curious. So you have more options, but people are using less. And so that for me is a shame. And so for me personally, I would never want to give that up. I always want to be intellectually curious. You told me like I do a lot of different things. It's because of that. I made documentaries because I wanted to know what it takes to make a documentary. What better way to do it than to actually do it. I started a creative agency because I was fascinated by how that works. So I decided, let me just set something up, and it was a passion of mine, and get into it. Right? Web3, why did you go into, let me ask you a question. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? You went, 2022, you went into NFTs, right?
Yeah,
why
NFTs.
Did you buy an NFT?
I mean, I've always been in the realm of, consuming content related to technology, and curiosity sparked my interest. I just wanted to try it out, learn things. So probably it's not like I didn't do it for an investment sake. I just wanted to learn.
It would have been a bad investment back in 2022.
Yeah, exactly. 2022. I mean, people made a lot of money, but I mean, that's not my goal. For me, it was more, even crypto. My goal was not to just make a lot of investments, make a lot of money. It's just to play around, see how it works, just be, just keep myself up to date, just understand how it works. And, I learned a lot of things. So that's basically why I did that.
Intellectual curiosity.
Yeah,
right?
curiosity.
You saw something new
My
and exciting.
tagline, my personal brand tagline is constantly curious.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think, and if you look at the science behind intelligence, learning agility and intellectual curiosity being a core driver of that is one of the number one predictors, right, of intelligence.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I think you're very unique in that sense. I just think not very many people do that. And the other thing I'll tell you is that while the objective may not have been to make a lot of money, I do believe when you invest time and effort in new technologies early on, that is when the opportunity to make a lot of money almost inevitably also comes.
Yes.
So maybe 2-3 years from now,
Yeah.
we'll have this conversation on your private island.
Yeah. Oh my God. I wish. Thank you, Gio. It was quite an interesting, insightful conversation with you. Thank you for spending the time with us. I know you're super busy, but you made the time to come sit with us and have this conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
So that's it, guys, for this episode. And we are available on all major platforms, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you.